Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. Today, in these two big boxes, we've got a VH700 vapor honing machine from Vapor Honing Technologies. I'm really excited to see what's in here. So let's take a look, put this thing together, see what it does on some of our vintage motorcycle parts. All right, so I'm not sure what's in what box, so we're gonna start with this one first. And this thing is pretty well stapled together. This looks like it's the base of the machine. This is a closed loop system. I'm gonna try to figure out the right way to get it out of this box. All right, so after a little unboxing, here's the base and the pump, and nothing assembled yet. In addition to that, I've got 25 pounds of glass bead. I've got 5 pounds of aluminum oxide, and another part of the base. And we're gonna pause because I wanna put this thing together on casters, and luckily it's got 1/2-inch holes at the bottom of each leg. So we're gonna run out and get some casters so that we can move this thing around the shop. The actual vapor honing machine is in the second box, so we'll take a look at that in a second. All right, so here we are after a trip down to the hardware store and a change of clothes later. Casters on the bottom. I've got locking ones on the front. They all swivel. And the beauty of this, I think, is I'm in a little bit of a constrained space at the moment. So it'll let me park the machine out of the way when I don't need it, pull it back out, and get it configured when I do. All right, so here's box number 2. What do I expect to be in here? Basically, just the machine itself, and I think all the other things that I ordered were in that first box. So let's get this thing open, see what's going on. All right, so once you get through all of the packing, there's your machine. It's actually a little bit wet. I'm guessing that's from testing it. So let's see if we can get that sucker out of there. All right, so after getting my son to help me get it out of the box, this is what we're looking at here. And you can see it's pretty high because I've got it up on the casters. It's actually a really good height for me. So let's just take a little closer look before we do whatever the next steps are. All right, so here's what we're looking at out of the box. Nothing connected. Door latches are not on there. Inside the cabinet, we've got the gloves and the gun. Another valve of some sort, don't know what that's for yet. The pedal is in one of the gloves at the moment. And on the bench over here are the door latches, and this is the way they came. Obviously, box was a little bit wet. I don't really care as long as everything in there is in decent shape. So let's try to put this thing together the rest of the way. All right, so here we are inside. It's where the vent goes. This is your cleanup sprayer. This is the gun itself. You've got some decent quality gloves. And a nice, what appears to be LED light up on the top. So this is good. Got to put the handles on. There's your foot pedal controller. And doesn't look like it'll be too long before we could actually try this thing out. And for the record, here's what it looks like on the back before we do anything. Got a couple of switches here for the lights, I'm imagining. 2 cables that I got to figure out where they go. And there's not a lot to it other than I also have to figure out where I hook up my air. So at this point, it might be a good idea to read the manual, and this is where our vent is going to go as well. All right, so we are almost ready to go here. What have we done? Put on the hardware to keep the door shut. You'll notice a little couple of marks that I can't get out of the plexiglass here. That's the way it was shipped. I don't think that's the end of the world, and maybe it'll clean up. The little bar that goes across that was loose when it came, but not a big deal. I tightened that up. Around the back, you plug in the air hose that comes from the bottom into here. You're supposed to have a regulator, which I don't have, so I just put a high flow fitting on there. I'm going to regulate from my compressor until I get a regulator. You have to drop this little ball valve on the back. That's your drain. You want to make sure that's shut. And down at the bottom, this goes into the pump, and there's a little clip that holds it in place. That water is from shipping. I have yet to fill this thing up. I've got it plugged in, and cool thing is when I reach around the back, turn the light on, you can really see well in there. I am impressed with that. And then of course I've got the vent stack, which is just held in place with friction. So I think at this point, I am ready to fill this thing up and see how it goes. So we're gonna fill it up with water next. And sadly, this is the only thing that was damaged in shipping. This little cup was inside the machine banging around. I'm not sure what it's for. Not the end of the world. It would be nice if it wasn't broken, but for now I can deal with it. So as you're filling it with water, you have the front ball valve open, which allows the overflow to go into the top basin. You're gonna let that fill up and fill the second basin, and you basically keep going until everything is full. You have a decent video that tells you how to do this, so I'm just following the instructions. All right, and I need 12 pounds of abrasives in there. So the bag is 25.4, zeroed out in the box. I'm gonna dump some in and basically go until I'm down to about 12 pounds here. So let's get that done. And that actually didn't work out too bad. Just dumped it all in there. Now I'm gonna move that around, I guess, and I think we're ready to go. All right, guys, so as you can see, we are all set up and ready to go. I tested, and my gun seems to be working. So we're gonna start with something simple. Here's the top of a valve cover off of my 1974 ATC 70. You can see this is basically in untouched condition. I think that's a little bit of blood from me taking it apart. A little bit of gasket residue on there. I don't know whether or not that's gonna come off, but we're gonna drop this in there, see how it goes. All right, so I started cleaning up that part and I had to stop. And I had to stop because I was having a couple of problems. And to make a long story short, it's a week later, I went back to the Vapor Honing website. I watched a whole bunch of other instructional videos and realized that I had a couple of problems that I didn't even know that I had. So I'm gonna take you through that, and hopefully this will help you if you're gonna buy and set up one of these machines. So let's take a look. All right, so I was running the machine, and as I'm going along, I noticed water leaking out of the back. Actually, a lot of water. So I came around to the back, and I took a close look at it, and what was happening was this connector, which brings in some of the electrical wiring, was leaking. And this is, this is watertight, but not necessarily watertight. And I'm gonna tell you why. So I lost a lot of water and some blast media along with that. And looking down, you can see in here, here's a lot of the actual abrasive that came out with the water. I was a little confused, and then I figured out what the heck I actually did wrong. This is not a flaw with the machine. This is a flaw with the way that I'm using it. What I mean by that, when you come around to the front of the machine, this is the valve that you use to drain excess water. And when you run the machine, this valve should be closed. And I had it closed. And what happens is this valve is lower than that electrical input in the back. That input is probably about here. So the water level shouldn't get up to that point. What happened is pretty straightforward, and let's talk about that for a minute. So here's the story. This is a closed loop system. What does that really mean? The easiest way to think about that is there's two water supplies. You have your water and your abrasive in the machine itself, and that circulates as you're cleaning your parts. And then down in the bottom, in these two tanks, are your fresh water. And the fresh water is used to clean the window. And you'll notice I don't have a window cleaning thing, but I'm going to talk about that in a minute. And there's a spray nozzle in there that you can use to clean off your parts. So that water from the bottom will eventually make the water in the cabinet rise to a level where you need to open this valve and let it go back out again. And the way to do that is pay attention to what you're doing with that spray nozzle in your window cleaning. And then while you're blasting parts, every once in a while, let it settle. And when I say let it settle, let it sit for 5 minutes or so. Let your abrasive material settle to the bottom of the tank. Then you open this valve up and the clear water will flow down into the 2 tanks below. The top tank, I'm going to show you this, has got a tube on it, and it's a settlement tank. So let's take a quick look at that. Not the best video, but this is the settlement tank. So you can see there's the pipe in there. You can see I've got some abrasive already settled in the bottom of that tank. And then when the water level rises enough, it goes into that pipe and drains into your freshwater tank at the bottom. Makes sense when you think about it. So what happened to me is I filled the machine up correctly. And filling the machine up, there's 2 different ways you can do it. You can fill it from the top with this valve open. Eventually the water will flow into the sediment tank. Eventually it'll flow into the bottom tank. And if you pay attention to that and let the machine basically settle, you'll end up with all the right levels of water. Or you can fill this up until it overflows. Let it overflow and shut it off, and then fill up the 2 bottom tanks, right? The sediment one you fill up to just a little bit below where the pipe is. The bottom tank you fill up to about 1 inch or 2 below the top, and then you're ready to go. So what did I do wrong? The water levels were right. You put in your blasting material after you have all the water set up. So I took my 12 pounds of abrasive, I dumped it in there, and then I used the spray nozzle to get it all mixed in with the rest of the water. And in doing so, the water in this tank naturally gets higher. Now when I was finished with that, I didn't let it pause, I didn't open this valve and let it drain. So I'm operating with too much water to begin with. Then as I start using the machine, I'm using the spray nozzle. After a while, I started to hear some funny noises from the pump. And at that point, I realized something was wrong, and I stopped. So with all that being said, I noticed a couple of things. First thing that I noticed was my window washing piece is missing. When I turn on the machine, I would get a blast of water from the top straight down. And I didn't realize what was going on until I went back and watched some of those videos. So I'm like, where is the piece that actually sprays against the window? And so I called the Vapor Hornet guys, and they're great. Right, great tech support. I was really happy. And the gentleman I spoke to said, you know what, it's likely in the bottom of the machine. All right, so he suggested I lift up the floor, take a look and see what's going on there. So I did, and down in the bottom with my water and my blast material is this nozzle, so we have to put that back on. The other thing I noticed when I lifted up the floor is there's a pump in this machine. And my pump, I'm going to show you in a minute, is in there at about a 45-degree angle. It's supposed to be straight up and down, so we got to fix that too. So my advice to you, when you're going through the assembly instructions for this machine, the first thing you need to do before you put any water in the machine, lift up that floor, check to make sure your pump is straight up and down. If it's not, get it straight up and down. I don't know what's involved in that, but we're going to do it. Make sure in shipping your little nozzle didn't come off, and if it did, find it and put it back on. And at that point, with those 2 little changes, we should be good to go. We're going to take my part through again and see what difference it makes. So let's take a look inside this thing. All right, so looking inside the machine, here is where my window washing piece is missing. This is the floor. This is after sitting for a week, so you can see how some of your abrasive material, as the water dries up, will collect. This is the floor. We're going to lift the floor up, and I'm going to show you the pump. And I think what I'm going to do is put a couple of zip ties in the corner so it's easier for me to lift this up if I need to get in there. But let me get it up and out of the way and we'll look at the pump. All right, and here's the pump. And you can see that's not straight up and down. I'm not even sure what holds it in there or if it just sits. So I'm going to get it straight up and down. I'm going to move some of what's left of my abrasive around a little bit so that it will sit straight up and down. But this is something you need to check before you fill up your machine. You're going to be in the same situation I'm in right now where I've got a bunch of cold water down there and I got to do something. So let me see what I can do with this. So it turns out there's nothing that holds that pump in place. I had to drain the machine. And now to get this right, I think I have to scoop out all of my blast media at the bottom so that the pump is actually sitting on the bottom of the enclosure as opposed to sitting on top of all of my glass bead. So as much as I hate to say it, I'm going to scoop 99% of that out of there, put the pump back where it goes, and then fill the machine up again. So be warned, you should do this while you are assembling your machine. And in my case, trying to clean out 12 pounds of blast media with the pump in the bottom doesn't work. So I just zip tied it up and out of the way. Now I've got it all out of there, and I can put the pump back down on the base, fill the machine back up, put my window cleaner on, and I think we'll be ready to try this again. And here we are after dumping the water and the media back. And so I've got some I've got to wash down. I'm not going to use the nozzle. Actually, I am going to use the nozzle this time. So I'm going to wash that down. Then I'm going to let it settle. And then I'm going to open this valve and let the water run back into the tank. And only at that point will we be ready to go. So let me do that next. All right, now while we let that settle, I'm gonna hook up the missing window piece. Actually, let's just check right now. If I open up this valve, let's see if we get much water out. Yeah. Yep, all right, so gotta let it settle because I don't want my newly washed in abrasives to go down to that tank. So we'll give it a minute, we'll put the other thing back on. So to fix my window wash, I unscrewed the fitting, put it in my vise, and reconnected it. And I did that because this is really, really tight. And I can tell you, I've got really strong hands from a lifetime of working with my hands and racing motorcycles. I couldn't get it together unless I put it in the vise. So be ready. If you have to do this, it's going to take a little bit of pressure to get it on there. And when you're all done, it should look like that. So it's been a couple of minutes. I'm going to open up this valve now and let any excess drain. All right, so in theory, this is the water that I just used to spray the rest of the abrasives back into the mix, and that water should be largely clean. And if you look at it, it's overflowing now and it's going back down onto the tank in the bottom. So this is the definition of a closed loop system. And that seems like quite a lot of water. And I don't think I sprayed a lot. And this is exactly why I had the problem the first time around. So we're gonna let this finish, and then we're gonna try cleaning up a part again, see how it goes. I'm gonna grab this engine case, and we're just gonna run this for a couple of minutes. And I'm just gonna do one area so we can look at it before and an after. So let's do that. So after a couple of minutes in the cabinet, and I'm running at 80 PSI at the moment, this is what I ended up with. Literally, this represents maybe 10 minutes worth of work. Now, if you scroll back and look at what this thing looked like when I started, this is pretty impressive. Let me show you my setup as it is right now with the machine all ready to go and just give you a little bit of my compressor. Let's take a quick look at that. All right, so here's the machine in my shop in use. You can see it leaks a little bit from that seal in the front. I'm not worried about that, and I think I can adjust these and kind of dry that up a little bit. And then I'm driving it from my new compressor. I realized that the compressor that I had just wasn't gonna cut it, and I knew that right off the bat. They say you need 20 CFM at a minimum. This Ingersoll Rand is a little over 18. I think it's 18.1. It's a 60 gallon, and it does a good job keeping up. No problems whatsoever. For the record, here's the first part that I started off with. It's gorgeous. All the gasket material off. No time at all. Once you know what you're doing, there's nothing to this. You know, I got one more thing I gotta try. So here's another piece of that engine. And I cleaned this up a bit a while back. I'm gonna give you a little close-up so you can see what it's like, what it looks like right now. And then I'm gonna run it through the machine. Let's take a closer look. All right, so here we are. This thing is pretty clean. You can see I went over it and cleaned up some of the rough stuff with a Dremel. There's a little bit of gasket material on the back. Of course, before you put anything in there, you want to take any bearings out. I just popped out the one bearing that was left in here. So this thing is pretty grungy. So let's put it in the machine, do our magic, and I'm gonna pay attention to how long it takes, and I'll let you know. Let's go. All right, so 16 minutes in the machine. Let me just give you a close look at this. Remember, it's the first time I'm using this thing. All right, here's that same part. Literally 16 minutes later. And trust me, with a little bit of time, once you have a better idea exactly what you're doing, your results are gonna be, I'm gonna guess, even better. Look at that. There's no way you're getting that from the starting condition to this in 15 minutes with any other technique. This thing is impressive. So what do I think, guys? I think the results speak for themselves. I was gonna paint these cases. I'm not sure I'm gonna bother. This looks fantastic, and I'm gonna guess that if I take the time and go over it again at lower air pressure, maybe 60 PSI and then maybe 40, I could really get this thing to shine up nice. But I've got a bunch of other parts I'm gonna do first. So my advice would be, if you're like me, if you do a lot of this. So in this part, prior to the purchase of this machine, I would have used paint stripper, which is a pain in the neck. I've got a small, very leaky glass bead cabinet that I'm not thrilled with. It's very inexpensive and it makes a giant mess. I've used that. I've got a little handheld sandblaster. I've got a little handheld soda blaster. Just, I can't be bothered with that anymore. This is the way to go. Now, this thing is not inexpensive. The open loop one is about 1,600 bucks if I remember it right. Closed loop was a little bit more, and of course you've got to have an air supply that's going to work. But if you do a lot of this, and this is the way to go. So hopefully this video was useful to you. Expect to see more, because I've got some other parts that I'm going to do, and I'll make a couple of videos as I get better with this machine. And until then, thanks for watching, guys. Subscribe if you're not. We'll